Good evening, everybody. Thank you to my mother for asking me again to share some ideas with you. It's always a great honor to give a shir for Jules and to share some Divrei Torah with you. The shir this evening is Le'iloi Nishmas, Reverend Brody, and also Rabbi Brody, Zechronam Levracha, Harav Levi Gavriel ben Reb Nota Chaim Halevi, and Harav Yehuda ben Harav Levi Gavriel Halevi. Their neshama should have an aliyah. Okay. So I'm speaking about what is real humility. Before we see the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, where we have a source for this very important subject, let me just tell you, share with you a couple of stories, maybe a little joke. So we've all come across the famous quote, I'm sure, of Winston Churchill. He once quipped, "Mr. Attlee is a very modest man. Indeed, he has a lot to be modest about." A famous quote. So hopefully, Emir Hashem, in the course of this year, we'll discover what is real modesty and what isn't. You know, the joke is told of the itinerant traveler who lands upon a Jewish community Erev Yom Kippur. He wants to find a place in the shul to spend this most sacred of days. He enters the shul for mincha and he hears the plaintive cries of a certain yid bemoaning the fact that he's a gornish, he's a nothing, he's dust and ashes, he's worthless, he's absolutely nothing. So the guest is very impressed. He thinks to himself, you know, I think this is a worthy individual to spend my Yom Kippur next to. The next day, Yom Kippur morning, again, he comes into shul and he hears this man berating himself, crying how he's an absolute nothing, he's a garnished. So far, so good. Then the davening progresses and it gets to Kriyas HaTorah, the laning. Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, Shalishi, and this man doesn't get an aliyah. And all of a sudden, this very humble, contrite individual is up in arms. He starts shouting at the Gabbai, how dare you, do you know who I am? What a chutzpah. His neighbor, this guest, can't believe his eyes and ears. Anyway, after davening, he says to this otherwise humble man, he says to him, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what happened? 1 minute you're saying that you're dust and ashes, you're nothing, and then the next minute you're screaming at the Gabbai for not getting shlishi. So he says, well, it's very simple. Compared to Hashem, I'm nothing. But compared to that man who got shlishi, do you know who I am? So we can see sometimes we can have a bit of a contradiction in our own minds. There can be a lack of consistency where sometimes we think we should be humble, maybe compared to Hashem, compared to other people. We want to assert ourselves. We want to try to push other people down. So hopefully we'll get a better understanding of this very important subject. Hashgacha Pratis, I only realized when I started preparing the shir, this week's Sedra. It is such an appropriate Sedra for this subject matter. We learn in the Sedra that Miriam and Aaron, they spoke Lashon Hara. On their exalted level, they were punished for speaking Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu. The Pasuk tells us, that even though Moshe Rabbeinu was an exceedingly humble man, plus the fact that Miriam had good intentions, nevertheless, Miriam was punished for this infraction, for this sin of Lashon Hara. The Pasuk tells us, Moshe Rabbeinu, what is his greatest title, his greatest compliment that the Torah pays him? that he was the most humble man who ever lived on the face of the earth. One of the Mefarshim on the Torah, he says a very interesting thing. He says in other places in Tanakh, Moshe Rabbeinu is described as an Odom. An Odom is the basic description of a man. But over here, it says Ish. Ish always denotes a higher level. This comes to teach us that Moshe Rabbeinu, he started life off as a regular person. Yeah, like me, like most of the people here. A regular man, an Odom. But because he worked on himself, because he refined and purified his character, he became an Ish, the greatest man who ever lived, the greatest leader and the greatest prophet that the Jewish people ever had. Just a little thing we can add to that. I don't know if you appreciate gematrias, but one of the early commentators explains that when it says, Voish Moshe Onov Ma'oid, he was a humble man, Onov in the Pasuk is written without a Yud. It's written Ayin Nun Vav. If you spell out those three letters, the letters in full, Ayin Nun Vav, that is, the Ayin is spelled, each letter is also a word. So the Ayin is to be spelled out, Ayin Yun Nun, the Nun, Nun Vav Nun, and the Vav is spelled Vav Vav. We get to the gematria, the numerical value of 248. You can work it out later. Don't take my word for it. 248, because Moshe's humility was all pervasive. It was encompassing throughout his 248 limbs, throughout his body. In other words, there wasn't a proud bone in his body. The Ksama Kabbalah, who's one of the important commentators, he says that there can be various factors that can contribute to a person feeling contrite and humble. It could be a person has physical limitations, weaknesses, emotionally, physically, or life experiences often. It's not always a bad thing. It can be a good thing. Make a person feel humble. They can lower a person and make us feel submissive, self-effacive. However, when it came to Moshe, in no way was this the case. Moshe was aware. Now, this is a really important concept, and Me'ez Hashem will come back to it. So Moshe was aware of his tremendous strengths. He was aware of his rare qualities and how he had so much to be proud of. Yet he worked really, really hard to focus away from the I, from his ego, to focus away from all his tremendous qualities. He was physically strong. He was brilliant. He was the greatest tzaddik, but he focused on moving away from focusing on his qualities and instead to focus on the greatness of Hashem and every other yid. And we know this manifests itself when he's praying for the Jewish people at the time of the Egel Azov, the golden calf. He says to Hashem, blot me out from the Torah if you're going to destroy the Jewish people. We see Moshe Rabbeinu was totally focused on everybody else. It wasn't all about the I, about the me. Okay. In light of this comment that we just said, I think a very nice quote is, and I came across it years ago, I don't remember who said it. I don't know if it's even a Jewish quote, but I think it's very profound. Modesty is not thinking less of oneself. Rather, it's thinking about oneself less. I'll say it again. Modesty is not thinking less of yourself. Rather, it's thinking about oneself less. Okay? That means that we're not obsessed. We're not preoccupied with the me the whole time. We're trying to think about the entire world, about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, about my role, what I can give, what I can do to make HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world a better place, and about making myself into a better person. Okay, so let's get down into the Shia. Let's have a look at the Mishnah from Pirkei Avot after that introduction. Rabbi Levitas ish Yavna oimer. Rabbi Levitas, a man of Yavna, used to say, Ma'oid ma'oid hevesh faruach. A person should be exceedingly humble. Shetikvas enosh rima. For the end of man is the worm. So again, Rabbi Levitas, the man of Yavna, said, be exceedingly humble of spirit, for the end of man is the worm. So if you think about it, in life, few people believe themselves to be arrogant, and even fewer people actually aspire to be humble. In our competitive world of keeping up with the Joneses, corporate ladder climbing, the trait of humility, one may have thought, would be counterproductive. But at the same time, we can all recognize the importance, the virtue of having healthy self-esteem. So, Mirza Hashem, we need to try to understand how these three concepts all work together in tandem. Arrogance, humility, and self-esteem. How do they interplay with one another? How highly should one think of oneself, and how lowly? So hopefully a few questions to have at the back of your mind will become clearer. What's wrong with being arrogant? Is it arrogant to think highly of yourself? Are humility and self-esteem mutually exclusive? Why should I be humble? How can I become more humble? Okay. There's a story that Rabbi Pesach Rowan brings in one of his books about a group of great Rosh Yeshiva, great Rabbonim from America, the top tzaddikim of the generation of America, came to Yerushalayim as part of a Shuva event. Shuva was set up in order to strengthen Yiddishkeit amongst former Soviet Union citizens, Jewish people who came from Russia. And they were at the Kosel on a Friday morning. At the time, there was about a Shuva, a young man who had recently become from. And we saw a commotion, lots of great rabbis gathered together. So he thought, wow, an opportunity to get a bracha. So he's looking at them longingly. A rabbi standing nearby sees this individual, this bracha. He assumes that he's probably after a bracha. So he says to him, can I introduce you to one of the rabbis to get a bracha? So he says, yeah, that would be fantastic. So this rabbi, he says, you know that man over there, he's Rabbi Aaron Schechter. He's the Rosh Yeshiva of a yeshiva called Chaim Berlin, a great prestigious yeshiva in America. It's fantastic. He goes over to him, he gets words of encouragement, a bracha. He's on cloud nine. A fantastic experience. The whole day, Friday, getting into Shabbos, he's telling everybody about his experience. That this man, he introduces him to this great Rosh Yeshiva. So on the Friday night, somebody asks him, did you see Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky? So the man says, I don't know. I don't know who anybody is. I don't know who these great rabbis are. I just went to Rabbi Aaron Schechter. I got a bracha. Shabbos morning also, he's telling everybody what happened. So people say, did you go to Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky? He's one of the tzaddikim of the generation, the son of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, one of the Gedolei Adar. Yeah, the real creme de la creme. He says, again, I don't know. I just was introduced to a rabbi. I got a bracha. That's what happened. And then somebody brings a newspaper and he sees a picture of the rabbis. So somebody points out, this is Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky. So the man says, this bracha, he says, what? He's the man who took me over, who introduced me to the great Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Aaron Schechter. Now that is humility. He put on an act as if he was just a regular man, a regular guy, and he took him over to get a bracha. As a shamus, he took him over to get a bracha from this great Rosh Yeshiva. A beautiful story. Now, as we said, humility is a fundamental midah, attribute. So much so that as a compliment, as a title for Moshe Rabbeinu, there can be no greater defining trait of Moshe Rabbeinu that he was the most humble man who ever lived. To Judaism, humility is one of the most sacred and elevated character traits that we can develop within ourselves. Let's have a look about, for a few minutes, what arrogance is. If we get a better understanding of what arrogance is, and then we can move on to self-esteem, and then humility, and hopefully, Mi'ez Hashem will have an all-rounded picture of the subject. So, the Malbim, in one of his Sefarim, he explains that arrogance means thinking more of oneself than one really is. It's an illusion. It's not real. It's not based on reality. It's based on a person's demyonos, on his imagination. But objectively, it's untrue. Somebody who is arrogant thinks that he is greater than he really is, even if he doesn't have any particular virtues to be arrogant about. It's also a magnification of one's own accomplishments and positive attributes, to the point that one overlooks the good in other people. He expects praise from others and even looks down on people considered less accomplished than himself. The Mesilas Yesharim, that is Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, one of the most seminal Mussar ethical works that we have, he discusses the different reasons why people deem themselves worthy of praise. It could be good looks, intelligence, strength. You can continue the list yourselves. He says, when a person attributes these things to himself, instead of realizing that they are God-given, Hashem has entrusted these character traits to us. If he forgets this, he falls into the immediate trap of pride. As soon as he forgets where they have come from, that can be potentially fatal. It can be very dangerous. One can fall into the trap of pride. He says arrogant people, arrogance can cause people to degenerate. It can cause people to lose their intelligence, even to the wisest of people. But as soon as their eyes have opened, as soon as they have begun their pursuit of wisdom, he says, there is a danger. If a person is arrogant, they can consider even the greatest of rabbis, of tzaddikim, whoever it is, the most brilliant of people, they will consider these people to be their equals. It is a big danger. A Baal Gaiva can't and doesn't want to learn from other people. Now, I have a chavrusa, and he told me that he has a Talmud. He's a good boy, essentially. Here, every boy is a good boy. But this boy has a slight problem. He thinks he knows it all. He thinks he doesn't really need to listen to the Rebbe, because he knows the Gemara already, which is what the Mesilas Yesharim is speaking about. He had an interesting shaila because a yeshiva called him up to ask him a reference for this particular boy. It's a good shaila in Hilchos Lashon Hara. I know he answered it with a lot of common sense, but this is something that we all have to be aware. It doesn't matter what age you are, a young boy, an older person, to understand where our gifts come from. Whenever it comes to Purim, I find a particular part of the Megillah to be very illuminating. The Megillah speaks about the beginning of Haman's downfall. It's fascinating The commentators, they see in Haman the epitome of arrogance and the mindless pursuit of honor. Think about it. Haman had everything. He was the second most powerful man in the civilized world. He had money, power, family, prestige. The entire country, the entire civilized world, wherever he went, they bowed down, they prostrated to him. Thousands upon thousands of people paid homage to him throughout 127 countries. But there was one problem. There was one man, one little Jew who would not bow down to him. Isn't it amazing? That one insignificant individual, he could not bear it. He could not tolerate, he could not live with that thought that there is one person in the world who doesn't give me the honor that I deserve. It's amazing. The whole Purim story, all the strategies, the plot that he devised to bring down Haman and his people, it started with that. His pride had been pricked. What happens after that? Haman, he goes home. He starts speaking to his wife and his family. I always find this fascinating. You see an insight, a psychological insight into the mind of a Rasha, of a bad person, somebody who's got such an inflated ego. He starts telling them, do you know how great I am? I'm the prime minister. Why is he telling Zeresh and his family his whole CV, his resume? Surely they know it. I think the idea is he's trying to build himself up because he can't live with it. His ego is struggling so much with the fact that there is one person who won't bow down to him. He has to build himself up again. That is the problem of gaiva, of arrogance. So if we must not be arrogant, the question is, should we then consider ourselves as nothing? Like the joke that we said before, the man who, it came out that it wasn't quite sincere, but the man who is screaming out that he's dust on earth, that he's a garnish. Is there any benefit, is there any virtue in considering ourselves as a shmata, as a nothing? So while arrogance is self-destructive, and the Torah clearly disapproves of it in the strongest terms, Jewish sources are also very, very clear about the importance of recognizing our own self-worth. Arrogance has many pitfalls, but a low self-esteem has dangers all of its own. Rabbi Twersky writes in one of his books, Angels Don't Leave Footprints. Rabbi Twersky, just by the way, wrote a lot about self-esteem. In his humility, he died last year, he was an amazing person. He said that he wrote 90 books, but he said that really he wrote one book in 90 different ways, all about how to have healthy self-esteem. Of course, that was just him being humble, but this is a seminal theme that runs through many of his books. He says that a healthy self-image has got two main factors. So self-esteem has got two main components, self-worth and competence. We'll have a look at them. So self-worth. So the first key ingredient to a positive self-image is a feeling of self-worth. We need to know that we have purpose. To feel that we're just wandering aimlessly through life without any direction, without a purpose, is very depressing. So is the awareness in equal and opposite measure that one's life is one of achievement. That is extremely elating. To have a conviction that one is achieving one's mission in the universe, that gives a person a true sense of joy as well as a feeling of self-esteem. Conversely, one who feels lowly will consider no action beneath his dignity. And the Rambam also says an idea which is very similar. If a person lacks self-worth, such a person will engage in unproductive behavior. If a person looks at himself as a lowly individual, he thinks that he's really not that good after all. He really doesn't have many virtues. He is a bad person. He's done so many averas. For such a person, he won't consider any negative act to be beneath his dignity because he already feels there isn't that much to be proud of. So what difference will it make if he does an avera? So it is very dangerous to have a low self-esteem, to have a low feeling of what you are worth. So the quality of our actions is based on our own self-image. It's really important. The less we think of our own moral character, the lower our standards will be. Okay, that was the first point that Rabbi Twersky said in terms of self-esteem, to be aware of our self-image. Number two, competence. We have to know, we have to be aware of that we have the qualifications, that we can do the job, that we are qualified to be good and fully committed members of the Jewish people and to do whatever job it may be. But we do have the CV. We can do it. We have the experience. We have the armory in order to take on any challenge. There is a very interesting story in Nach that concerns David HaMelech. Shaul, King Saul, he has a conversation with King David. I'm sure you'll remember the story when that giant Goliath comes and he's taunting the Jewish people. So King David, as a brave young man, he says to King Saul, I want to do it. I want to confront this man. King Shaul says, you can't go to fight against this Philistine, for you are but a youngster, while he is a man of war from his youth. So immediately, a very interesting dialogue, if you pay attention to the words. David says to King Shaul, your servant was a shepherd for his father. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went out after it and struck it and saved the sheep from its mouth. If it attacked me, I held onto its mane and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. He has blasphemed the legions of the living God. And David said, God, who saved me from the lion and the bear, will save me from this Philistine. Now, if we have a look at this passage, it's very interesting that David is trying to present his credentials to Saul, that he is qualified to fight against Goliath. Why is he mentioning all his past achievements? It's a very important point that we can bring out from over here. Why didn't David say from the outset that he was confident that God would save him from the Philistine? Why does he begin instead with a record of his amateur matador skills? After all, he was acting out of zeal to defend God's honor. Moreover, the ability to overpower a lion does not guarantee that one can overpower a trained and skilled warrior. So, what is David trying to accomplish with this conversation that he's having with King Saul? What's he trying to prove? So the answer is, a certain contemporary Rabbi Reuven Leuchter explains, before David could even begin to think about going to war against this giant, he needed to be aware of his own experience in the past that showed him he was capable of standing up to someone or something more powerful than himself. Once he could point to such an experience, he was able to build upon it and place his trust in Hashem. That would help him accomplish an even more incredible feat. Not only must one be aware of his abilities to meet the practical challenges of life, we must also be aware of our ability to meet moral and ethical challenges. That is, we must be aware of the successes we have met in those areas as well. So David HaMelech, he's trying to remind himself that he has done it. He has the t-shirt, as we say. And if he was able to do it as a shepherd, standing up to the lion and the bear, he can also do it with the help of Hashem against Goliath. That is what King David is trying to achieve with this conversation with King Saul. Someone with self-esteem feels that he has the wherewithal to deal with life. He's got the ability to think, to learn, to make decisions, and cope with whatever situations life will throw at him. Now, self-esteem is also a very important Torah value. It's not only important to avoid detrimental influences, but a positive self-image is actually an obligation that the Torah tells us we must have a healthy self-esteem. Without it, we're not going to keep the mitzvahs properly, we're not going to learn Torah properly, we won't be a proper Jewish man or a Jewish woman without this character trait. And when a person has a healthy self-image, a person will be able to stand up for himself in the face of other people's demands, and he'll be able to stand up against his Yetzer Hara. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin, it says, all the other creations in Hashem's world were created, all the animals in pairs, male and female. But when it comes to man, we were created, Lefichach Adam Nivri Yechidi, we were created as an individual. First of all, Adam, then Chava. But we started off as an individual, as a single unit. The Mishnah tells us, in order to tell us the importance, the fundamental importance of what it means to be a Jew. The Mishnah says that's why anybody who saves one life, it's as if you've saved the entire world. Somebody who, God forbid, kills one person, it's as if they've destroyed the entire world. Therefore, the Mishnah continues, some very interesting words. Lefichach, therefore, kol echad ve'echad, every single person, chayav, is obligated to say, bishvili nivra ha'olam, because of me, the world was created. Now, if you have a look at this Mishnah, you think, wait a second. This Mishnah sounds very egotistical. Yeah, the world was created, Adam was created as an individual unit. Yeah, therefore, we are obligated to say that the world was created for me. Chayav, we are obligated. So, if the entire world was created for me, does that put everybody and everything at my disposal? Does that give me the license, the right to demand everything? Every whim must be satisfied. But if we have a look at this Mishnah in the correct light, we have a look at the commentators, we'll understand there's something much deeper going on over here. It doesn't mean that. What it means is that not that we have a sense of entitlement, but a responsibility. Chayav. If it means an entitlement, then we wouldn't be obligated. Why would you be obligated to say the world was created for me? No, it can't mean that. It means a responsibility. That we have so much to achieve, so much to accomplish, so much to build and develop within ourselves as committed members of the Jewish people, for our families, for our communities, for the entire world. Therefore, you have to say, every single person must look at himself and say, am I fulfilling my function, my mission, my task in the world? The world was created for me. As Rashi says, I will not cut myself off from the world on account of a single transgression. That's what Rashi says on this Mishnah. If I've done one thing wrong, that doesn't mean that I need to negate myself in order to tear myself away from the world, that I'm not going to be a productive, an integral part of Hashem's creation anymore, any longer. On the contrary, if I did things wrong in the past, that should spur me on even more to elevate myself, to enrich myself, and to enrich the world. We have another very interesting Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. It says, don't consider yourself as a Rasha. The same idea. Don't look down at yourself. Don't regard yourself as a bad person. If a person is wicked in one's own eyes, then he won't bother doing teshuvah because he's already lost hope of ever trying to be a better person. And when faced with the possibility, a challenge of doing an avera, should I not? If a person has this mindset that he is already a Rasha, you're not going to stand up to the challenge because in your eyes, you already think that you're a Rasha. Okay. I want to move on to humility. Okay, we've spoken about the problems of the pitfalls of arrogance, the importance, the fundamental importance of self-esteem, of our integral mission to ourselves and the world. Now let's speak about humility. There's a story that's said about Rabbi Yechezkel Abramsky. He was once summoned to testify in a case in a court of law in which the Beis Din of London was sued by a shochet, a ritual slaughterer. They had been sued by a shochet who had been fired. So as the head of the Beis Din, Rabbi Yechezkel Abramsky, I'm sure you've heard of him. He was a legend of Anglo Jewry, went on to live in Israel. Rabbi Abramsky had no choice but to testify in a secular court. So the barrister asks him to state his name and his position. Says, Abramsky, the Beis Din. The barrister then asks, is it true that you are the greatest living halachic authority on the European continent? Got to present his credentials. So Rabbi Abramsky says, yes, that is true. At that point, the judge interjects and he says, excuse me, Rabbi Abramsky, is that not rather haughty on your part? I thought that your laws and ethics teach you to be humble. Without any hesitation, Rabbi Abramsky responds, I know we are taught to be humble, but I'm under oath. Recognition of personal greatness is a must, and yet arrogance is forbidden. So how can we develop positive self-esteem without being arrogant, without becoming arrogant? The answer is humility. So contrary to popular belief, humility is not about self-negation, submissiveness, meekness, acting as if I'm a gornished, I'm a doormat, a shemata, but rather appropriate self-valuation. True humility demands that our appraisal of our own self-worth and achievements be the result of intelligent reasoning with regard to our role in Hashem's universe. So in the next few minutes, we'll explore more deeply what real humility is and how it is acquired. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, he has a little chapter here I would like to quote. On his commentary to Mishlei, he speaks about false modesty. He says, that's no virtue. He says, that's nothing to be proud of. Somebody who is afraid to come forward, to push himself forward, to stand up for other people, a feeling of total insignificance, inadequacy, that kind of modesty can be excused at the most as impotence, but never can it be considered a virtue, Rabbi Hirsch says. Someone who tolerates abuse in any form when he could do something about it is not humble. He is a fool. Strong words from Rav Hirsch. That is not a Jewish concept. Humility has nothing to do with meekness or submissiveness. On the contrary, as we've been saying, a prerequisite to humility is nobility to understand who and what we are, and an appreciation of one's self-worth, of our infinite worth, but ascribing it to Hashem. There's a story which is told about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. He was widely considered one of the foremost Talmudic halachic authorities of his day. Actually, I'll tell you a story about his son. So Rabbi Feinstein, as well as being known as a great genius, as the greatest halachic authority in his day, he was also famous for his great modesty, for his humility. He had a son called Rabbi David Feinstein who passed away last year, and he walked in his father's footsteps. He was also a very modest man. And the story is related how somebody went to Rabbi David Feinstein on one occasion to have a chat with him, wanted to have a meeting. So somebody said that you'll find him outside his office. He's normally on the phone, and he uses the public phone booths that the yeshiva bochrim use. You'll find him there. So this man who is writing this account of his meeting, he says that he just went to the yeshiva, and he thinks, he might just catch him. He doesn't make a meeting, and he finds him outside at a public phone booth on a probably a very important phone call. He's speaking on the public phone. So when Rabbi David Feinstein finished the conversation, he invited this young rabbi into his office, which, to this rabbi's amazement, was filled with cases of soda. Yeah, lemonade, as we say in English. So someone explained to him that Rabbi Feinstein himself refills the soda machine, not wanting to burden anyone with the chore. That is a hallmark of what it means to be a tzaddik, to be an onov. No airs and graces. To act like a regular person. Nobody should feel intimidated when they speak to you. That is the sign of a gadol, and it is indeed the hallmark of all our gedolim. They have always excelled in this character trait of anova. And as we said, anova is understanding that we do have skills, not to deny them, but to ascribe them to Hashem. A person has a work interview. So the potential employer asks, can you tell me some qualities about yourself? Can you tell me about some of the greatest achievements that you've done? So naturally, and I think naturally we should feel a little uncomfortable to speak about ourselves. But this is not a contradiction to humility. To put ourselves forward, at times even to push ourselves forward, to present the God-given gifts that we have, and to say that, yes, we have them, and I want to use them for the sake of making the world a better place, for the sake of learning Torah, for the sake of doing chesed, kindness, for the sake of elevating and enriching my world. Not to be embarrassed about our midas, but to thank Hashem for our virtues and our strengths. I remember many years ago, many centuries ago, when I was in school, I remember my Hebrew teacher, he said, speaking about Moshe Rabbeinu, as we said before, he was the most humble of men who ever lived upon the face of the earth. So this man, he said, he was so humble. If somebody would tread on Moshe Rabbeinu's feet, Moshe Rabbeinu himself would apologize for getting in the way. Now, I don't think Moshe Rabbeinu would have done that. That is not what humility is. The Netziv, that stands for Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, one of the classic Torah commentators who died in 1893, on this pasuk, he says that being humble doesn't mean that you see yourself as lowly or deserving of disgrace or insult, or the basic respect and cover that we all need as human beings. That is not the definition of humility. Being humble means that you are not needy. We're not needy. We're not in need of covet. We're not looking after it. We're not looking for it. We're not chasing covet. And if we don't have it, it doesn't affect our state of mind. Meaning that my happiness, my simchas hachayim, my happiness, my contentment is not dependent upon me receiving that honor. I don't need it. You know, somebody, he once went to a Rav and he complained that all my life I've been running away from covet. And the rabbis say that if you run away from covet, from honor, it'll run after you. And I don't understand. I've been doing this for so many years and I still haven't found it. It hasn't run after me. So the rabbi said, it's very simple. The problem is you keep looking over your shoulder. Really, you want it. It means so much for you. A situation like that, Hashem won't bring covet to you. So how do we learn and develop this trait of humility in the last few minutes? So an honor of a humble person, he looks to others and he looks up to others to see how great they are. He's not preoccupied with the ego, with the self, with the I. The book, A Tzaddik in Our Time, about the great tzaddik, the legendary tzaddik of Yerushalayim, Rabbi Ari Levin, writes there about what true humility is. The son of Rabbi Ari Levin, he speaks about his father. And he said he had one basic quality, which was the foundation and the crest of all his good deeds and acts. It was simple humility. And he said in this, he excelled beyond human understanding. Now, there is a Mishnah a little later in our chapter in Pirkei Avot. It's a very similar Mishnah. It says, Hevi shva ruach b'fnei kol adam. Be humble before all people. Now, Rabbi Ari Levin said, what does it mean, be humble before kol adam, all people? He said that often we explain this to mean that in front of all people, even the smallest, least significant of people, I should be humble. Even the lowly person who nobody gives any cover to, I need to be humble before him. But he said, no, it means something else. That often people find it easy to have covered, to be humble before very great people. They're very great, of course, I'm going to be humble in front of them. In front of lowly people, young people, people who know much less than themselves. It's also very easy to be humble in front of those people. Great people, no problem, I can be humble to them. Lowly people, young people, that's no problem. People will think, I'm very humble. They'll think that's actually a badge of honor. I'm able to be humble. But he said about his father, Rabbi Ari Levin, that he was able to be humble even in front of his peers, in front of his equals. That's what it means in the Mishnah, even people who may be competitors, people you think could be potential competitors, peers, your friends, who naturally our human inclination is to try to push our agenda, try to push ourselves, try to push what we want and our ambitions ahead of them. We should be humble before all people. So a few little tips. How do we get this elevated status? So let's give just a few little tips. And I think, first of all, the most important lesson for all of us is, and I'm talking to myself, of course, more than anybody else, we need to learn from life experience. Let life teach you to be humble. The University of Life, it's such a great teacher. Look outside. Look at the amazing, profound world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created, the universe. You think about the coronavirus, this tiny, tiny, minuscule virus that we have still not yet fully understood. And as much as we think that we understand, there is so much more that we don't understand. the limitations of the human mind, the temporary nature of physical strength and beauty, they all contribute to a sense of humility. So Rabbi Zelig Pliskin, he says, life will give us many teachers of humility. We need to keep our eyes open for the lessons when they come. We need to develop the habit of saying, we should say to ourselves, this is an opportunity to gain humility. When somebody doesn't speak to me with respect, this is an opportunity to gain humility. When I don't do as well as expected, this is an opportunity to gain humility. When I become aware of a weakness, another weakness, or a mistake, say, this is an opportunity to gain humility. And that, of course, there are benefits to having humility. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, he quotes from his father, the Stipler. He says, if a person, an amazing thing, if a person feels that he has problems in his emunah, in his faith in Hashem, he should work on his humility. I don't know the reason, but I'm guessing it could be because if a person has a lack of emunah or faith, it could be because he is thinking too much of the me, of the I, and he has replaced Hashem, so to speak, with the greatness of himself. When a person works on humility, to put his strengths, abilities, capabilities in the right perspective, in the right place, as a servant, as a child of Hashem, that will help him in his emunah, faith in God. A person who's got humility will have better shalom bayis. The vast majority of problems in the home, husband and wife, wife and husband, they come about as a direct result of a lack of humility, to be able to overlook your prerogative, to have the ability, the strength of character, the moral fortitude to say, I was wrong, I'm sorry. And when a person has humility, he's able to grow as a person, because we will realize that we are not perfect, and we'll become aware of our strengths and skills. We're not blinded or afraid to acknowledge shortcomings. And when somebody does point out a deficiency that we have, we'll be able to acknowledge it and grow as a result and become a much better person. A humble person is a happier person. We don't begrudge. We're not jealous of anybody else, and we're happy to share in the success of others. And when we have the correct perspective, we will grow in confidence and have better relationships with everybody, with our spouse, parents, children, friends. Our ben adam lachavero, our interpersonal relationships will grow immeasurably. I'm going to end off here with one short story. I hope I haven't kept you too long. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, a great tzaddik of the last generation, a genius in Torah, wisdom, but also in midas, and especially humility. The story is told about him that he was once walking along the street in Yerushalayim, Shari Chesed, where he lived, and he was walking surrounded by his Talmidim, and a bin lorry was driving past, and the bin man jumped down. He saw the great man. He runs over to him and he kisses his hand, as is the custom in Israel with the great tzaddikim. So Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, he turns to his Talmidim and he says, who knows if he should be kissing me or I should be kissing him? He says to his Talmidim who are surrounding him, look at my life. I was born to a scholarly father. My parents encouraged me to learn Torah from the day I could read. My in-laws are extraordinary people. Look what intelligence Hashem has blessed me with. What a supportive wife I've got. Who knows how much is expected of me? I should be changing the world. This man, however, He probably was born to a very different kind of parents. He very likely never had the opportunities that I did, the education I had, or the upbringing I was given. And yet, look how he has grown. He is the great one. It is I who should be kissing him. Ladies and gentlemen, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach encapsulates the way a humble person looks at the world. On the one hand, he recognizes his accomplishments, but at the same time, he recognizes that all his successes and achievements are simply gifts that Hashem has granted him in his kindness. Please God, hopefully I have become a more humble person. Hopefully I've given you a few ideas on humility that we can all grow from. Thank you very much for listening.